Esta mañana está con nosotros Ryan Berg, el director del Programa de las Américas y responsable de la iniciativa sobre el futuro de Venezuela en el Centro de Estudios Estratégicos e Internacionales. Ryan, thank you very much for taking this call.
Thanks very much for having me, Rodrigo. Buenos días. Good morning.
Buenos días. Ryan, well, you wrote a piece talking about the judicial reform here in Mexico, a very complete analysis in the benefit of those who read you in the United States, because here in Mexico we're immersed in this situation. The first question I want to make you is, how do you see the position of the Biden administration at this point? Because we have seen the position of Ambassador Salazar, but is not very emphatic, this position, probably because immigration and we're in the electoral in the electoral election, the November election in the United States, and probably that's on the agenda also in terms of the definition through Mexico. What is your vision about it?
Rodrigo, I think that's exactly right. The Biden administration is distracted, and they're viewing the situation with quite a bit of trepidation. They're nervous. If they reach out too much, if they say too much publicly, and they push back on a law, on a suite of reforms that they know will be prejudicial to U.S. companies and to U.S. investment and to the overall bilateral relationship between the United States and Mexico, they fear very much that López Obrador will stop his cooperation on migration enforcement at this very critical juncture as we head into the final stretch of the U.S. presidential campaign.
Le pregunto a Brian, bueno, que nosotros estamos inmersos, él escribió una gran pieza que se llama el Plan C de Andrés Manuel López Obrador y el bloque de Norteamérica, sí lo podemos mantener, que es el título de lo que escribe Ryan, y le digo que, bueno, pues en México estamos inmersos en ello, pero ¿cuál es su visión con respecto a la posición de la administración Biden? Porque más allá de los posicionamientos del embajador Salazar, pues parecería cierta timidez en la administración Biden, probablemente pensando en la elección, y me dice, sí, el presidente Biden, están distraídos, están nerviosos obviamente porque saben que esta sería perjudicial, la reforma como está planteada, tienen miedo sobre todo por si presionan mucho a México, que Andrés Manuel López Obrador deje de cooperar en materia de migración, y eso sería importante. Now, we're seeing different parts of the United States, for example, the private sector, obviously, and some legislators that are pushing harder in terms of issuing letters to Antony Blinken, to Catherine Tai, and all other figures. So they want them to push harder to Mexico. What do will you say that's the strongest outcome so far, or could it be a more strong push from them?
Well, Rodrigo, I think that they could push harder, especially in the private channels with López Obrador, telling him, and also Claudia Sheinbaum, who will take over in less than 1 month, everything that's at stake in this reform. It makes good sense that members of Congress are writing letters to the U.S. Trade Representative saying, please push harder. They're hearing from their constituents. They're hearing from businesses in their districts. They're hearing from corporations in their districts who invest in Mexico and are rightly worried about this suite of reforms. The Wall Street Journal reported yesterday that somewhere around $35 billion in potential foreign direct investment is sitting on the sideline at the moment, waiting for two things: the outcome of the Plan C reforms, as well as the outcome of the U.S. presidential election. Rodrigo, that's about equivalent to the amount of FDI that Mexico gets in a single year. So this is considerable, and it makes good sense that members of Congress would be trying to push the Biden administration to do more. The best channels to do more could potentially be in the private channels, where we don't have to publicly say very loudly that we oppose this reform, but we can make very clearly the consequences for the overall bilateral relationship, especially with the incoming president, who's going to have to deal with the fallout of all of this.
Sin duda, ahí le pregunto si podríamos esperar. Ya vimos expresiones de parte del sector privado, de algunos legisladores que han enviado cartas, por ejemplo a Antony Blinken, a la titular del USTR, Catherine Tai. Le pregunto si pueden empujar más fuerte y me dice sí, pueden empujar más fuerte, sobre todo en canales privados. Están preocupados. Menciona Ryan, que ayer el Wall Street Journal publicó que hay 35 mil millones de dólares que están aparcados esperando dos aspectos. Uno, el resultado del plan C de Andrés Manuel López Obrador y la elección de los Estados Unidos. Y bueno, pues que en los canales privados vaya que han expresado esta preocupación y que finalmente a Claudia Sheinbaum le va a tocar experimentar las consecuencias de todo ello a partir, obviamente, del 1 de octubre. What would you say it will be the position in terms of vote? For example, if Kamala Harris is the winner of the November election, what will be her position to Mexico? We don't know from her so far, but maybe it's continuous with the Biden administration. And what could be the scenario in terms of Donald Trump if he arrives again to the White House?
Look, I think if either candidate in the U.S. decides that this is an important issue that they want to push on, and I think both candidates will, the 2026 review of the USMCA agreement is going to be a very difficult moment for Mexico. What Mexico is managing to do by pushing these reforms through is realigning North America. Whereas previously I would say it would be Canada and Mexico against the United States in resisting some of the push for leverage and a potential renegotiation of the agreement. Keep in mind the Canadians are just as nervous and just as upset about these reforms as the United States. I'm going to put a pause on both his relationships with the United States Embassy and the Canadian Embassy. We shouldn't forget that. And so what will happen, I think, is that there could be a realignment of Canada and the United States against Mexico to try to push back on some of these reforms. And the best moment to do that would be in the USMCA review, which is required in 2026. Now, the way that the two candidates might go about doing it would be different. We've seen in the past Donald Trump is a leverage guy. He likes to build up leverage against an opponent or a negotiating partner and then expend that leverage throughout the negotiation. Kamala Harris, we don't really know exactly how she would engage in that kind of a revision or renegotiation, but we do know that that would be the best time for these issues to be pushed back on by the United States. And I think both candidates would take that opportunity. And so in sum, Rodrigo, I would say Mexico is setting itself up for some major headaches in 2026 when the revision comes around.
Le pregunto a Ryan cómo se ve el escenario en caso de que gane Kamala Harris o gane Donald Trump. Me dice, y es bien importante lo que menciona, bueno, pues ambos lo van a considerar un asunto importante y la revisión del TEMEC en 2026 va a ser en donde lo veamos, pero podríamos ver una realineación. Antes de ello, México y Canadá iban a resistir o estar alineados para resistir, digamos, las revisiones que quisiera hacer Estados Unidos. Pero no hay que olvidar, me dice Ryan, que Andrés Manuel López Obrador hizo una pausa también con la Embajada de Canadá y que probablemente Canadá está igual de preocupado que Estados Unidos y estarían alineándose Canadá y Estados Unidos con respecto a México en términos de estas reformas. Dice que en el caso de Trump, lo conocemos, lo hemos visto en el pasado, pues es alguien que utiliza va construyendo palancas de negociación y bueno, pues eso sería el tono, mientras que Kamala Harris, pues no sabemos, pero es claro que para el 2026 será un verdadero dolor de cabeza esta revisión. Esto es Imagen Empresarial. Esta mañana está con nosotros Ryan Berg. Él es el director del Programa de las Américas y responsable de la iniciativa sobre el futuro de Venezuela en el Centro de Estudios Estratégicos e Internacionales. Ryan, on the weekend we saw the critical situation of the dictatorship because it's that in Venezuela. So many in Mexico think that Mexico is going to the same path as Venezuela. Obviously, I don't think necessarily that, but what is your answer? You know the situation in Venezuela. Here in Mexico, well, the judicial power that counterweight the executive and legislative power is going under. We will see in this week. But what will be your answer if someone asks you or tells you that Mexico is turning or going in the same path as Venezuela?
Well, with all due respect to Mexico, I think it's a bit hyperbolic. We shouldn't exaggerate, but we should understand that the road to Venezuela is long. Autocracies don't happen overnight. But there are certain moves, Rodrigo, that are very important in that path to greater and greater autocratization and eventually an fully consolidated authoritarian regime as exists in Caracas. One of the key things is actually going after the judiciary, reducing the judicial scope within a country, or absolutely capturing it, as happened under Chavez in Venezuela. So we shouldn't forget that there are certain major points along the pathway to democratic backsliding and eventual autocratization that are important to note. I would say, after having said that, the Venezuelan institutions are basically non-existent. Everything is controlled by the executive. Mexico, thankfully, still has plenty of independent institutions, alternative power centers, ways to reverse decisions or to stop decisions of the majority party. So we're quite far from that. But we at CSIS have done several reports where we've cataloged the amount of democratic backsliding that's taken place under AMLO, and it's considerable. We put together a checklist of 16 different metrics, and I believe even before he introduced Plan C, he met about 14 of those 16 metrics that are common metrics on democratic backsliding. So the health of Mexico's democracy is not exactly in great shape, but it's still pretty far from Venezuela.
Le pregunto a Ryan que muchos en México ven que está recorriendo el país un camino similar al de Venezuela hacia pues una autocracia. Yo decía pues la dictadura de Venezuela y me contesta que bueno pues eso es hiperbólico, que hay que tener cuidado, digamos, con exagerarlo. El camino a las autocracias es largo. Obviamente, en su momento, Caracas capturó al Poder Judicial y, bueno, pues así ocurrió en tiempos de Hugo Chávez. En Venezuela no existen instituciones autónomas, digamos, pero en México los centros de poder sí están más divididos. Afortunadamente, México está lejos de estar en una situación así. Sin embargo, pues ese es el camino de las autocracias. Y luego me dice que en 16 métricas que se han visto antes del Plan C de Andrés Manuel López Obrador, en 14 de ellas pues había retrocesos. Claramente la democracia mexicana no está en su mejor momento, no goza de buena salud y ese es un aspecto fundamental. Ryan, what are the scenarios that you see going forward? Probably on Wednesday the Senate is going to approve the reform. Maybe it doesn't in terms of the interpretation of the vote. Obviously, if they can convince, and I'm trying to be elegant in convince some senator from the oppositions that go to their side, but probably it's going to happen. What will be the scenario? How do you see things?
Indeed, Rodrigo, convince is a very euphemistic and nice word. But we think that this is most likely going to move forward. It looks like right now there's still one vote short, and Morena has responded to that mathematics by basically saying, we'll either find the vote or we will redefine what a supermajority means. I saw Adán Augusto last week saying, well, it could mean 86. It could also mean 85 if we decide to round down from the full two-thirds. So it seems as though they're intent on pushing this through. That would send it, of course, to the states by the end of next week. And I imagine what we will hear from AMLO is that as we near Mexican independence and the grito and all of the celebration that Mexico should rightly be having around its Independence Day, they'll turn that into, of course, a celebration of this signature suite of reforms, which I'm sure he will argue is liberating Mexico from the tyranny of the judiciary, which doesn't seem to agree with him very often. So I think that we're going to see this move forward. I would be highly surprised if the Morena party didn't find that last vote in the Senate or, barring that, be able to redefine what actually determines a supermajority. But keep in mind, if there's anything that goes wrong in terms of process here, we've seen the Supreme Court initiate or rather, we've seen the Supreme Court rule as unconstitutional certain signature pieces of AMLO's legislation that didn't follow proper process. And that would set up quite a constitutional battle, maybe even a constitutional crisis, if the Supreme Court decided to intervene and say that this Plan C and how things were passed was in fact not following constitutional procedure.
Le pregunto a Ryan cómo ve el escenario. Sí, coincidimos los dos en que es eufemístico decir si convencen a alguien, ¿no? Porque les falta un voto. Y menciona él, pues lo que hemos visto, o logran el voto, van a redefinir las matemáticas. Nos dice Ryan lo que mencionó el Adán Augusto, que fue secretario de Gobernación, que ahora está en el Senado, que dice, bueno, pues podremos alcanzar la supermayoría con 85 en lugar de 86, como está definido. Dice que difícilmente le sorprendería mucho que no se diera esta situación, es decir, el que convenzan a algún legislador, y bueno, pues que para el grito Andrés Manuel López Obrador el grito de independencia, por supuesto, esté en la celebración. Dice que esto puede detonar, por ejemplo, un proceso inconstitucional de la Suprema Corte de Justicia, y eso nos podría llevar incluso a una crisis constitucional, y bueno, pues ese sería el escenario que estaremos viendo. Last, Ryan, what will happen after the 5th of November? I mean, after the presidential election in the United States, will you say it will be fast, the reaction of the next president, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, on November, or we will need to wait until January? What is the scenario? Or maybe Biden is going to push harder?
Well, we have to remember that no matter who wins in the U.S. election, they're not president until they're inaugurated in January of 2025, January 20th. Yeah. So we may hear some statements from either of the campaigns or from the president-elect after November 5th, but that doesn't mean that he or she will be able to affect policy. Joe Biden will remain president until the 20th of January 2025. And so far, the Biden administration's approach has been very passive. It's been very cautious, very nervous about the potential for Mexico to pull back some of its cooperation on immigration enforcement. And I would just caution the Biden administration and the person who comes out victorious in our election to give a very strong look at how much we've sacrificed in favor of a very uneven and sometimes not very cooperative immigration enforcement from Mexico. We've sacrificed a lot, and it's cost Mexicans, I think, in terms of their democracy by not pushing back, by not communicating in those private diplomatic channels when we should have.
Por supuesto. Ahí le pregunto a Ryan cuál es el escenario una vez que tengamos presidente, bueno, alguien electo en Estados Unidos a partir del 5 de noviembre, y me dice, bueno, pues hay que recordar que hasta el 20 de enero no asume el próximo presidente de los Estados Unidos, y que evidentemente pues le van a dar una revisión profunda cualquiera de los ganadores, pero que la administración Biden, el gobierno de Biden ha sido pasivo, demasiado cauteloso, y bueno, pues a cambio de la cooperación en materia migratoria, pues los mexicanos están teniendo un retroceso democrático, con una cooperación que a veces no ha sido tampoco la mejor y la más óptima en materia migratoria. Ryan, thank you very much for the interview. It's very, very useful to listen to you, the point of view of the United States. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Ahí escuchamos a Ryan Burke, director del Programa de las Américas y responsable de las iniciativas sobre el futuro de Venezuela en el Centro de Estudios Estratégicos e Internacionales.